isn't it in the next Olympics that breakdancing is an official Olympic sport?
Is that a thing? Wow.
Yeah.
Which I think is just amazing. But I think partially that is because of the testament of social media, right? That's the ways in which people have been able to see how dance is happening in these forums that they couldn't have experienced otherwise. And I think what it did is it gave access to people who wouldn't have experienced that otherwise, to go, oh, that's legit. That is something that we can bring together and begin to foster something new with. And to the ways in which that it's global, right? And so the ability to see that it's not just something located in one specific kind of cultural norm, it's a cultural norm that is spreading across the globe, that is influencing one another, that we can come together and produce something greater from it.
Knobloch's Dance presents Dance Behind the Screen, Process Production and Social Media. Hey knowers, welcome to our podcast. We are Knobloch's Dance, a social media-based company. We strive to say no to the box. We connect interdisciplinary art, technology, and artists to re-envision the process of art making and sharing.
Hello, everyone. This is your host, Azaria
and Reyna
of Dance Behind the Screen podcast. And today we're speaking with Chris Collins.
Chris Collins is an assistant professor in the Department of Communication at Missouri State University. He's also the director of the Missouri Fine Arts Academy, a 2-week interdisciplinary residential arts experience for high school students. He received his doctorate in performance studies from Southern Illinois University, and he recently served as the keynote speaker and coordinator for the Patti Pace Performance Festival at LSU. His work has been honored at both national and international stages, such as the Conférence Universitaire de Suisse Occidentale at the University of Lausanne, Switzerland, the Tabernacle Theatre in London, and Errol Hill Theater at the University of the West Indies, and the Muson Center in Lagos, Nigeria. His most recent work focuses on environmental performance, materiality, and the relationship between human and non-human animals. Thank you for speaking with us today, Chris.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me on.
So to get started, how would you describe your career? So what got you on the track that you're on today, and what kind of led you towards performance studies?
Yeah, so my kind of beginnings began in California. I grew up there and had started to do a little bit of performance work while I was there. And my dad has multiple sclerosis, and he got sick. And there was a kind of an initial desire to speak back kind of the emotional content that I was dealing with at the time. And so my parents ended up divorcing shortly after that, and I moved to Texas and found forensics, which is competitive public speaking. And primarily my work was with performances of literature. And so I fell in love with poetry as kind of a method to be able to have the emotions that I was experiencing, be able to get that out of my body and to share that with others. And so that's kind of the initial part of it. Also, my parents are both artists. My dad does a lot of material work and has had galleries. My mom does a lot of material work as well. My brother's a musician and also a performer. And so part of my family history is also kind of connected to that. But that trajectory basically through forensics and with that background is what led me to performance studies. I was originally going to do theater, but I found that I wanted to deal with more critical issues than a lot of what I was kind of forced to do in theater. So that's how I ended up in performance studies.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Nice. So, Chris, can you talk a little bit about what material work is for our audience?
Yeah, like materiality.
Yes.
Like some of that. Yeah. So a lot of the work that I've been doing recently kind of comes out of critical cultural perspectives and kind of a move towards posthumanism, which is trying to decenter the human as kind of the basis for all things, right? And so thinking about different ways of knowing, different ways of being, and materiality has really kind of come onto the scene, emerging out of kind of changes in knowledge sets out of out of quantum physics. And so quantum physics kind of brings to the table possibilities of the ways in which reality is much more permeable than we had understood previously, and that all objects, all things have kind of their own thing power to them, their own kind of essence that produces something that can affect others. And so the ways in which we like to think of ourselves as autonomous beings, materiality really kind of challenges that and really helps us kind of think about the ways in which the objects around us also influence who we are, influence what we do on an unconscious level.
So is that tying into this concept of human versus non-human? Are you trying to create like a broad spectrum to where everyone's on an equal playing field?
Yeah, in a sense. I think for me, it's about different kind of epistemologies or ways of knowing, and the power of that. And so thinking about that, there are so many of these vast worlds that exist with us right here, right now, that I'm not able to experience in the same way. And so when I think about, say, my dogs don't see the world that I see, right? They have a visual ability, but they smell the world. Like their understanding of what truth isn't necessarily sight, it's smell. And so that world exists all around me. I'm just not capable of experiencing it in the same way. And so I can look to them to understand what that world is.
And so how's that showing up in your work that you create? Will you tell us a little bit about your art?
Yeah. So I recently had 2 pieces published in Text and Performance Quarterly. One is a show that I created called Animal Parade. And the other is kind of an introduction to that piece that is talking about the costuming and art pieces that I made for the show. And so the artwork that I had made was basically kind of dealing with environmental degradation. And so what I did was I looked around when I was in Louisiana. I looked for what are the kind of material objects that are kind of connecting to me, that are dealing with some of these issues. And the 2 things that kind of stuck out most was Spanish moss and cigarette butts. And so I kind of started to produce artwork building upon those 2 objects, and then turned them into costumes and things for the performers. And so that's kind of the materiality moving me into the ideas of the show. And then the show is really kind of dealing with critical issues around human and non-human animal communication. So the ways in which animals become objects for humans that we use or that we try and have for status, the ways in which we are breaking down environments. There's about the ways in which we kind of connect with other animals. And so that's kind of where that show ends up going.
You are listening to Navvox Dance.
What is the relationship of social media to your creative process and project?
Yeah. So we definitely have social media connected to the Fine Arts Academy that we are part of. And we do a lot of advertising there. But in terms of not necessarily PR, kind of getting the word out, for me as an artist, I find social media to be extremely important in terms of how I get influenced by the art that I'm experiencing. I feel like in many ways, we've never had access to the amount of influence that one can have that we have right now. And so I end up actually spending a lot of my time looking at different kind of art pieces or following different artists on Instagram. I've done a lot of work kind of scrolling through Pinterest to see how things get built, and to be influenced by some of the artists that are putting their work there as well. So those are kind of the areas that I end up using it.
Interesting. And that's a good segue, because we also know that you are an arts administrator. Yeah. So how is social media influencing this aspect of your career?
So this has been a change for me. So my work as an art administrator was really kind of residing in just one local space previously when I ran the Hopkins Black Box Theater at LSU. And my job there, the kind of advertising or the ways in which we got word out was very limited in terms of social media. We used a lot of kind of material objects to spread the word. Coming here to MSU, there's a whole team now that is a part of kind of that advertising and PR and promotion. And so I'm finding that I haven't used as much previously, but I'm starting to be much more aware of it now, kind of in this role, but also seeing that it's not just something that one individual is doing. Like there are many ways, especially when it comes to a university. There are lots of rules and regulations about what can be shown, what cannot be shown, what colors even have to be on some of the promotional material. And so there's a group of people that help kind of operate a lot of that. So yeah, that's where that's at this moment.
Right. And then just to continue, how is your arts administrator role influencing dance per se, or theater, costume design, set design, all of these things that you've kind of had your hand in?
I would say in terms of my role, it's in some ways it's a love that I've had for a long time, because I've never felt as if art was isolated. I always felt as though art is generated by the influences of all those things around it. And so it never made sense to me to have, I mean, I understand for logistical reasons why we break apart the disciplines, but it seems to me that all of those disciplines influence one another, can impact one another, can build upon one another, and we come to a different kind of knowing, right? And so when you have somebody who's doing dance, who thinks about dance as a painting as opposed to just a movement of body, the ways in which one then orients towards that structure and what gets produced, I think, becomes different. And so my work right now is really kind of seeing those intersections and seeing what can be grown from those connections.
So can you talk a little bit about the concepts of environmental performance? I feel like we've kind of missed that. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine. So I think of environmental performance in two ways. One is kind of coming from an approach to thinking about issues in the environment, environmental degradation, global warming, climate change, things of this nature. And so how can we begin to address some of the really significant issues of our time as human beings here on this earth, especially kind of where we're at right now? And so that's a part of it. The other part of it comes from Richard Schechner, who is out of NYU. And his work is really kind of thinking about the performance space differently. And so he thinks about it as the entire space is for performance, right? It's not just that the stage ends at like the proscenium. And so thinking about the ways in which we can engage in performance where our bodies are in space and we're interacting live with the performers right there in front of us. And so it really kind of asks us to be a part of the environment as opposed to somebody who's watching an environment.
I think this environmental theater or installation and dance theater and performance theater is becoming very prevalent now, and where I think our audiences are also really wanting to be a part of the experience and not just sit and view what's happening on stage. And I think through dance and theater, we're really starting to realize that boundary doesn't need to exist.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I appreciate you bringing that up in your work. And do we see that in your work in particular? Do you like to make sure that the audience is involved in?
Oh, yes. So when I produced Animal Parade, one of my main influences was Sleep No More, which is a performance company that basically restaged Macbeth, but it was inside of a giant kind of hotel, and you could follow along with all the performers throughout the hotel and experience different parts of Macbeth. And so when I began doing Animal Parade, the show started with somebody who did a 30-minute installation piece where they were a living statue. And as the audience kind of comes in, they kind of interact and experience this living statue. And then when the show kind of unofficially begins, you realize that the performers have been there in the audience the entire time, and they start up right in the middle of the audience and kind of engage them and guide them into the theater space. And even throughout that performance, multiple performers would come alive from the performance. I even had the person who's running the light booth came down and gave a performance. And so the ways in which those established boundaries got broken, I think were good. I still would have liked to have done more, but I think I was happy with what I was able to do.
So Chris, going back to communications, how do you think that communication has been a through line for you as an artist?
Yeah. So the arts for me have always been about communicating what is beyond language or what is intangible. And so it's never about a transactional kind of moment where it's information giving, although that does happen at times. For me, it's about kind of getting at this idea of kind of nowness or jouissance or the ways in which art can tap into that which I cannot necessarily produce an idea of for myself, or it can make me feel something that is ambiguous, that I have to kind of navigate some tensions with. And so it's the communication aspect is really kind of about getting to the in-between of what we experience on a day-to-day basis, without having to be explicit about what it is we're seeing. And, I don't want to make things like the Transformers movies. I'm not interested in like spectacle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm interested in what the affect is. I want affect.
Don't forget to say no to the box.
When it comes to social media, how is that affecting art and art making, and how is it affecting your life from the aspect of consumers and the aspect of communicating with our audiences?
I think part of it is the ways in which when I think about Anne Bogart, who's a wonderful director, has a book called The Director Prepares. And one of the concepts she talks about in that book is called arrest. The experience of what it's like to be arrested by something. And I think with social media, I think one of the things that I think performance does that super well live, and we experience that. And that's partially why I think we go, because we can't get those experiences in other places. And we're finding them even less so, I think, as we're becoming much more predominant in terms of just sitting back and passively watching things. But that moment of arrest, I think, can still happen. And I've still definitely experienced it through social media. And so one of the beautiful things about kind of coming across a lot of other people's artwork in those forums is the ways in which I can be going through a day, not really thinking much about things, and then see this one particular image, or see this, hear these certain sounds, or see the ways in which my perception gets changed by a certain image or a certain idea that brings me back to that state of arrest, right? And so it is becoming something that is more frequent, I think, for the experience of the ways in which we navigate the medium. And I think it will continue to get stronger as we move forward.
You are listening to Navvox Dance.
As we start to wrap up, we have something called our Flash 4 portion, where we ask all of our guests to answer 4 questions in a flash. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay.
Flash 4.
So for number 1, if you had to recommend a resource to our audience, what would it be?
So I was thinking that, again, I already mentioned the Anne Bogart text. Beyond that, I would also recommend The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. She has some wonderful techniques. It's very practical, technique-based, to help you generate creativity in all ways. And so I love some of the work that book does. Also, I've been listening to a lot of Alan Watts, who is, he deals a lot with Zen Buddhism, but more so I'm interested in it in terms of the ways in which it allows one to be free to kind of a creative process and stop, being so critical or getting in one's way, and allowing the ideas to generate themselves to produce other pieces of work.
Interesting.
Question number 2.
Yeah.
What was the first dance you saw?
The first dance I ever saw, I must have been probably in 3rd grade, and it was cabaret, actually.
Nice.
Fine. It had been cut down and kind of edited highly. They were actually doing the show, I want to say, at a local theater in California. And I just remember being in awe, like the entire thing, just absolutely. It was actually the very first theater show I'd seen too. And so it was kind of a wonderful meeting of things coming together.
That's awesome. I'm glad they adjusted it for a 3rd grade audience.
Yeah.
So next, do you think that social media has a positive influence on the dance world? Yes or no?
Oh, yes. I mean, absolutely. So if we think about the ways in which, so isn't it in the next Olympics that breakdancing is an official Olympic sport? If I think correctly.
Is that a thing? Wow.
Which I think is just amazing. But I think partially that is because of the testament of social media, right? That's the ways in which people have been able to see how dance is happening in these forums that they couldn't have experienced otherwise. And I think what it did is it gave access to people who wouldn't have experienced that otherwise, to go, oh, that's legit. That is something that we can bring together and begin to foster something new with. And to the ways in which that it's global, right? And so the ability to see that it's not just something located in one specific kind of cultural norm, it's a cultural norm that is spreading across the globe, that is influencing one another, that we can come together and produce something greater from it.
So question number 4. Chris, what is your favorite social media platform?
I would say it's definitely Instagram, although I do end up using a lot of YouTube for just kind of personal lectures and things. I have tended to steer away from Facebook, but I recently had to get another account, so I do have another Facebook now. And I really enjoyed Twitter, but I never participated really as much as I kind of sat back and watched. Same thing with Reddit. I used a lot of Reddit. But again, I wasn't very participatory in that process. It was more about experiencing others.
Awesome. So thank you so much for your time and for sharing your thoughts with our audience today, Chris.
Thank you so much for having me.
And before we leave, could you please share with our listeners your social media handles or website, or however they can stay connected with you as we move forward?
So some of the best ways that we do have the Facebook Missouri Fine Arts Academy webpage. For me personally, they can find my Instagram at CMC Collins, COLLINS, and they can see some of the other kind of photographic art and stuff that I do there. I don't necessarily remember what my Twitter and whatnot was. They can also do, if people are interested in the Academy, kind of see what the Academy is doing, they can go to missouristate.edu /MFAA and get more information there as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Chris.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for taking your time to tune into Dance Behind the Screen, a bi-monthly interview series where we go behind the screen to question process, product, and social media. Be sure to follow us on social media at KNOW Box Dance. See you next time, and don't forget to say no to the box.